Good afternoon and welcome to another Edufuturists podcast. You'll see my face close up. It's not because I'm weird this episode. I'm always weird. Let's just put that out there. But also my microphone. I'm in a hotel and I don't have the microphone stand. And it's right on the desk and the desk's really low. So you'll just see this eye most of the podcast for anybody watching. But
And a weird half of your beard.
it's like a really weird
half
look.
face. Have you watched Batman, A Dark Knight Rises, whatever else? Like half face, yeah.
You're going to send me off on a tangent. We
Sorry,
don't have a guest to bring in, but at the same point, that movie always makes me laugh because he's sitting in the hospital bed, and then half of his face is obviously, and he turns it as if he's like, oh my, I'm shocked. That half face, I didn't realise it was still another person. That's going to be me. This is Vanilla Ice. This is Gary Barlow based on some of the LinkedIn
yes, it is.
I knew you were going to drop it in, so that's why I thought.
No, I just need to mention this. I reckon your half face is the other half face, though. It's not the bit that everybody sees on the camera. Sorry, mate, that's horrible. Anyway,
it's okay.
Sorry.
It's fine.
Sorry.
So I'm in a hotel room. I'm always in a hotel room, but I'm having to do the podcast from a hotel room. So we are really excited, and hopefully the Wi-Fi stays and plays nice, and also hopefully somebody doesn't come vacuuming outside the room. They've literally just come into the room. You've been vacuuming the door for the last hour. I don't know what's going on. So any of that, at least you won't have the dog or the kids this episode. So, Ben, you all right? Doing all right, mate?
Yeah, I'm good. I just got back from Lanzarote, so that is always good because it's not particularly warm here right now, so we had some nice sunshine there, but I am good and ready to roll. Got a few busy weeks, but good busy. Full weeks going out. I'm going out to guests in Dubai, and I'm out over in Belfast and bits of other travel as well, which is all lots of good fun. Are you all right?
Yeah, good. Yeah. Busy life, lots going on, but let's not go into that on a podcast. I mean, it's not that type of podcast. I'm not going to go into too much, but yeah, we have a guest. Usually, say waiting in the wind. She's just sitting quietly and politely, waiting for us to stop yabbering and chatting.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get more edgeways, to be honest.
Absolutely. And before we came on air, you were saying that you landed literally a short time ago, and you're straight into this from a glamorous Spain. So, Louise, it's great to have you with us. Do you want to kind of introduce yourself, and then let's walk through what your journey is up to now, and then we'll go from there, if that's all right?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Louise Attwood. I am the subject lead for design and technology, engineering, food, and also recently computer science for AQA. Started life as a teacher and now work for the exam board. I've worked there for about 8 years now.
How is that a mix? So DT, food, get it?
Yeah.
But then computer science how is that a cluster of things to look after? Or did you go, you know what, I'd like that?
Well, it's an interesting one actually, and I wasn't sure, but having kind of delved into computer science a bit more, and it's not my subject specialism. I am a D&T teacher by trade, but there's quite a lot of kind of crossover with some of the work that we are currently kind of pushing forward on in D&T. Obviously, there's a lot of CAD/CAM kind of work, but also down to kind of design. And, we met Steve, didn't we, at the brilliant conference. And it was amazing at that conference to see quite a lot of overlap between kind of design and creativity and computer science and future tech, I guess.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and it makes a lot of sense to tie that in, even with engineering as well. So we had a few weeks ago, we had Dr. Hilary Levers from Engineering UK, and that conversation around the practical application, and rather than it just being engineering is for welding things together or building bridges, it's that idea that there's software engineering ties together and chemical engineering. And there, interestingly, as you are talking there about that, I don't know what you said. You said a cluster. Steve said a cluster. That's a great word, by the way, cluster. But I suppose like a collection and a cluster of subjects together. Do you find then, and I know we'll probably come back to this at some other point in the podcast as well, do you find that that is it's powerful to be able to see them interdisciplinary elements and the ability to be able to cross over ideas rather than just being a single siloed subject.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as a subject, design and technology, which, like I say, is my kind of specialism, is one that is changing rapidly and draws on lots of other different subjects to kind of it's like the application of knowledge a lot of the time. It's not just knowledge in its own kind of area of the curriculum. And I think it's one of those areas of the curriculum that does draw on a huge number of other subjects, whether that's maths or science, things like properties of materials. We now have 15% of the qualification actually covering maths in the exam. But the same goes for computer science too. Engineering obviously sits somewhere in the middle there. And food has traditionally been part of the D&T umbrella, although it is quite a different subject now. But it's still kind of the application of some of these more traditional core subjects, like, the food science element of food preparation and nutrition, which makes it really interesting to me. I think it's a very quickly changing, developing world, really.
And just to step in, I know we're going to kind of go through your current role and some detail in there and assessment, but that must be such a difficult thing. I think, we've all been in education, we've all been educators, so we still kind of see ourselves as that. I'm guessing we all kind of have the tattoo on above our heart, we just maybe wear a different t-shirt above it or on it. But I think actually the ever-evolving DT engineering, computer science landscape, that's really tricky. And just to kind of call out the computer science element of it, how do you write a curriculum as an awarding body right now that actually is current in the current context and has longevity beyond a shelf life of maybe a week at the longest? I know that's probably jumping ahead, but it just came to me and I was like, that's really difficult. How does that what does that look like?
It's huge. And actually, as soon as you've written it, like you say, it becomes outdated, especially in a fast moving subject like computer science or design and technology. And it does have to have an element of flex. We can change things midway through a process, but then they're slight tweaks. You can't redevelop the specification every year. And actually, I mean, the process of redevelopment or reform can take 2 years to do. And that process, I mean, this is a whole other podcast. We could go down this route, but that process and what's involved in it is really, really complex and only becomes a final product that we can use in schools once it's been approved by Ofqual. So, us starting off with computer science GCSE, for example, it's unlikely to change as a product hugely, because if we did that, we would have to get Ofqual to approve it each time. So therefore, normally, reform might happen every 6 years, something like that. Although we've seen a longer period of time now. But yeah, normally we wait for big changes in a reform process. And that is really challenging. It's challenging for teachers to keep it relevant, but it's also challenging for writing. And the intention really is that the writing is done so that allows a bit of flex, so that the key principles can be taught through a number of different ways, and those ways can be updated as opposed to the actual content. If that makes sense.
Sorry, Ben, go on.
You're good, mate. You're good.
I'm just. I know I'm conscious, obviously. This is not just about AQA, but maybe this is the question is around Ofqual, because ultimately I think people know the name and will understand, if you've been in education, the role that they play. And this is no criticism per se of them, but that must be really difficult, because the word OODA loop I'd use. I don't know if everybody's familiar with the word OODA loop, but it's a change management process and a change system that was introduced by the US military quite a while ago, and it's that ability and the speed of which someone can orientate, observe, orient. I'm going to get all. I'll come back to what they have, but it's basically the ability for something to be seen, to view, and to implement and enforce change quickly. You think about government, you think about central government, NHS, all those kind of things. It takes such a long time that people, and like education, At times it feels like it's trying to turn an oil tank around, but we're putting £5 of petrol in at a time. That's not actually the change makers at the top. But I can imagine having to go for Ofqual to change it is a challenge for you.
It is a challenge, and what is absolutely brilliant is that is brilliant. Steve is being evacuated from his hotel room.
I'll see you all soon. Oh, it stopped. Hopefully it doesn't come back on again. I'll just keep feeling the floor and the door. If it gets warm, I'll have to leave. But maybe it's coming
you were
to an
talking
end.
about challenge. You were talking about OODA loop.
That was the government, and that was Ofqual listening. Stop the conversation.
I think so.
Maybe walk through that. And again, just to repeat, this is not about us criticising, but ultimately will explain to many the challenges in England that we do in terms of trying to implement change, that it has to go through so many different steps to change it, that it can't be quick.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is a huge issue. I think at the end of the day, what our main kind of objective
sure that they know exactly what they're doing and that everybody is following the same set of parameters in order to make sure that the kind of assessment at the end of it is fair and valid.
And there's got to be something really important about that. It's like the Ofqual thing that was just mentioned there is almost the first two letters at least are similar to another similar type of body that we sometimes have something to say about. But interestingly, both of those organisations, the principle behind them is to make sure that there are standards and that those standards make it fair and equitable for learners and for teachers and for learning organisations and assessment bodies to be in a position to get a standard and a measuring stick and I think that's really important. That sometimes we come across, and I know what I can be like sometimes, and Steve's the same. Sometimes it comes across that we're bashing all these things because we think that we don't believe in standards. We don't think it's important, and it's absolutely not the case. And I know that is the same for you. But ultimately, I suppose that ability to pivot is got to be tempered, hasn't it? It's got to be tempered with ensuring that we have rigour. And not rigour in just as a stick to beat people with, but also because rigour has got to be around fairness and standards and measuring. And so, yes, fast-paced, but also fairness as well. And we talk about this a lot when we have the conversation around AI, is that you can't it's very, very difficult to create an AI policy or an AI strategy, because by the time you've committed it to paper, it's out of date. And you'll probably see that I've said probably 200 times on this podcast, mentioned the digital marketing curriculum that I was involved with most latterly, and I was invited down to an awarding body, and they asked me to advise and give them some thoughts on that. And it had last been updated in 2014. And this was not that long ago. And Snapchat wasn't even a thing. So we're talking about digital marketing, and Snapchat, which was and TikTok weren't even there. And there was no reference to them in this thing. So, but we've got to temper that with, we can't just do every fad that comes, because we've got to make sure it's like, is that really what we're talking, what you're talking about there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the absolute crux of it is that the assessments need to ensure that students have a fair shot, that they know where the goalposts are, that the assessment is valid, it's robust, that it's scalable. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of students completing exams at exactly the same time across the country. It needs to be something that works on that scale. And while it's really important to stay up to date, it does have to be a balance between the two to ensure that students have the best chance at success, really, and they know what they have to do to get there.
Yeah. So I jumped ahead. I get excited and I jumped ahead massively. But let's scale it all the way back to your time in education. What did that look like? How did that set you up to kind of, just a career really? I think, it's great to talk about assessment, but also successful women and people stepping into tech. I know we had a conversation. I'm not in tech, but in assessment, the future of education stuff. What does that look like? And also, how did that journey take you out of the classroom and out of education at a period of time? So maybe walk through that, and if that's okay. Louise.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I started off as a design and technology teacher, teaching product design as it was at the time, kind of woods, metal, plastics, material areas, which was interesting in itself because my first role was in a Catholic high school in Southport. And it was a great school. It was a really fab school to work at. Really enjoyed it. But I do remember in my first week when you mention about women in tech, but in D&T, I guess I'm kind of more that area. I remember being in the workshop, trialing a project, and a caretaker coming into the classroom and saying, "Oh, you're not going to let her on the machinery, are you, sir?" to the guy in the workshop, not knowing that I was the new D&T teacher. So it's definitely a real thing that happens still, and we're talking maybe 15 years ago now. But yeah, it just reminded me of that story. But yeah, started off teaching in Southport, then moved to another couple of schools. I was at an all-girls grammar school, entirely different challenges, very interesting to work there for students that really wanted to succeed and were really excited about D&T at times, but often struggled more than other students with really letting go and attacking problems that they didn't necessarily have a right or wrong answer to. You know, some students in schools like that I've find it difficult when you say, "Well, I don't know how to do that. Let's work it out together," and that's really challenging. But yeah, more challenges there, different challenges. And then I worked in a school on the Wirral, which was a comprehensive school, which has really high pupil premium numbers, and some of the most fantastic moments of my teaching career were in that school because some of those students were really engaged and excited about D&T, and it was a real privilege to be able to teach some of those kids. They were great. But alongside doing all of that, I worked for AQA, just kind of on the side, doing some marking. I started as a reviser, which basically means checking through the questions that a lead assessment writer would write to see whether, we want to check that you can't look at the question and actually interpret it in an entirely different way. So I would look at those questions and check that I thought that they were fair and reliable questions to assess what we were trying to assess. And then the more and more work that I did for AQA, the more of a geek I became when it came to assessment. And I do really enjoy getting to the nitty gritty about what makes good assessment. And weirdly, I know that quite excites me. So started to do more and more work for the exam board, and then started full time back 8 years ago. And left my D&T classroom behind, which mixed feelings about that. At least I can have a cup of tea and it can be hot, and I can go to the loo, and all of those kind of things that you can't do as a teacher. But yeah, definitely miss the kids.
Yeah, and I think there's, interestingly, most of the people who have left the classroom, including me and Steve, who reflect back on the time in the classroom, who felt like it was time to move out of it for whatever reason, say the same thing. It's not that they missed there's some things they don't miss, but there's some things they really do miss, which is getting young people and working with young people to love a subject and to really thrive in that space and enjoy the practical application of it, and seeing your young people move into further study or work in that place, and then coming back and telling you how much of it, like all them the wonderful things, and now you get to influence that at an even greater level, which I suppose that's the thing really that we hold on to, I suppose, which is saying we don't get to work in education the same way, but working on it means that we still have impact and we get a broader impact. So it is sad sometimes. I had a conversation with an ex-student just this weekend, and I was saying, and they said to me, "Do you miss it?" I was like, bits of it. I do miss bits of it. Interestingly, in that space now, then, and obviously we're in the midst of a curriculum and assessment review in the UK, and I know that some of our listeners aren't in the UK, but just for everybody who knows, we've had a change of government who have put in a curriculum and assessment review, which is set to be published some point in 2025. We'll see where that goes, and they're asking lots and lots of questions about where that goes, and interestingly, in your role now, because you said you're a geek around assessment and what that's like. What does that mean? What do you mean by being a geek around it? What because I think I am as well. So I'm interested to hear what that means.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, I think from what you said before, it's a really privileged position to be able to kind of influence, I think, and that comes in lots and lots of different forms, whether that's with teachers or with bigger organisations, being part of groups of people that are responding to this consultation, amongst other things, meeting with the DFE when we want to change something. All of those parts of my role I absolutely love. But the kind of academic side of assessment really floats my boat. I know that does sound strange, but it's kind of getting to grips with how individual questions perform amongst students. So one of the things that we do in my role and across AQA is we have a reflection. It's called a review meeting, but it's essentially a reflection on how each paper has performed in the summer. So, for example, we would look at GCSE Design and Technology 2024. We would look at every single question on that exam paper and really delve into the data on how students have done with that particular question. And then alongside that, tie in any kind of anecdotal information that we have from lead examiners, from people like myself who have a lot of contact with teachers or can remember teaching it themselves, teachers that are already, still in the classroom, to try to really understand, okay, why have we got a huge number of non-attempts in that question? Or why have most students either got 2 out of 4 marks or 4 out of 4 marks rather than utilising the 3? And what we want to see, obviously, all the time is that the mark distribution is always really even across the different marks. So we've got a nice bell curve. And we look at that data and try to get to grips with the why so that we can write really fair questions and we can understand when something might put a student off or when something might lead a student in a particular way that we didn't intend. And so that's the bit that I get excited about. I think it's kind of analysing that information and really going deep to try to improve our performance as exam writers, I guess.
I'm going to throw a question out.
Have I bored you to tears with that?
No, you 100% haven't. It's really important. My question is, I think it's my family just stood outside the door deciding, oh, I'm going to cry. Don't know what's going on. It sounds weird.
You're going to need to speak up.
Yeah, I'm going to have to be like that.
Yeah.
So the question is, you're reviewing the questions. Is anybody reviewing the design beyond questioning and the type of assessment that might then feature into there? And I know, again, talk about some of the conversations around, DT as an example of, imagine a world where there was no practical in DT or food and those kind of bits. But actually, there's a lot of bits where the context is never applied to at the endpoint assessment. Is there any conversations around actually giving that a greater importance or a complete mix of maybe thinking about a whole project rather than an endpoint for DT and those subjects that the cluster subject that you're looking at?
Absolutely, there is huge conversations around that. And one of the things, so I can give you an example of a new product that's just been launched, which I don't know whether you're aware of. We've got something called Stride, which is a maths platform in which students, you're nodding, Steve, you've heard about this, have you? It's a diagnostic tool from AQA, which basically allows students to answer their individual set of questions, as opposed to an exam paper which everybody, sees, and the questions are exactly the same no matter what your ability in that subject. But this is a way of students answering a question, and then based on that answer, it will give them the next question. And it's about really getting to grips with what students don't know, what they don't understand, and how can we kind of meet them where they are in their learning, as opposed to just giving them this final test. So there's a lot of work going on with things like that kind of are about changing the system of exams, and not necessarily across the entire board. Of course, we want to do this with caution and ensure that we don't completely change everything in one fell swoop. But there are things like that. There's a numeracy qualification as well, which is about students being able to take a test as and when they're ready for the test, as opposed to at a particular point in the year. There's all kinds of stuff like that going on. For D&T, so I'm a massive advocate for students manipulating materials, learning through experimenting, playing with materials. I think there's an absolute need for practical application. And so I would be an advocate for anything that, from an assessment point of view, validly assesses those skills. But certainly the ways in which we do that are under discussion at the moment, particularly at the moment because of the reform and call for evidence, etc. But to be honest, we're constantly reviewing that. And there's a really amazing group of stakeholders in D&T. It's a fantastic community to be part of. And there's lots of conversations that we're part of with people like the Design Council or Royal Academy of Engineering, some of the big HE providers, CLEAPS, Design Technology Association, people like that, who are all playing into that conversation to think, okay, could we do something completely radical? And it's not always down to us, it'll be the DFE that decide and Ofqual that monitor that. But certainly we can be a representative of what teachers want in that space, and also have those conversations with those organisations to see if there's anything new and interesting that we could do.
Okay. Sorry, Ben. You go first, because go on.
I suppose where I was going with that was around it's really important from our perspective, and I suppose it's welcome to hear that as you ready type. What I can't remember what's a phrase that gets used quite a lot, but that idea of you can be assessed when when a student is ready, teacher appears. That kind of concept. I do love the idea of us probably having a real rethink. This is not just individual assessment organisations. This is everywhere, right? The whole, it's very, very well known, our position around exams as the only measure. And some people think we're anti-exams. I'm not anti-exams at all. I worked as an examiner and a senior examiner for 4 exam boards. I actually supported lots of young people into that space, and I actually think they do have a place. It's when they're the only place, and it's when they're high stakes, and everything hinges upon that 2 hours at the end of 11 years of schooling. Like, it's that as a measure in and of itself has been the thing that we've been going, not entirely sure. And we're not the only ones that do that. And obviously, from what I'm hearing there, that's exactly what AQA is saying. That's what you're saying at AQA, that it is a part of the process. The exams do have a place, but they're not the only way to assess, right? That's
Absolutely.
what you're saying.
Yeah, it is. And I think it's important as well there's two parts to this. One is that, really difficult these days for teachers with the amount of content that's in some of these specifications not to teach just to the exam at the end. That's not our intention. And I know it's easy for me to say that, I don't have to sit there in front of those kids anymore. But it's not the intention. And we are hoping that, if we could put some recommendations forward for what the new qualifications would look like, we would want to pull that back and try to allow some kind of space within these specifications for students to explore, and not have to worry about, oh, we can't have that conversation right now, kids, because, there's not enough time. We have to move on to the next thing because the curriculum's so packed. So yeah, I think that's really important. And the other thing just to mention is, as an awarding organisation, we're constantly trying to look for the best possible way of assessing students, whether that is a traditional paper exam, whether that's a digital exam, whether that's an NEA or coursework, as we used to say. There's all kinds of different ways and ways in between that we haven't fully investigated yet. I went to a demonstration where we looked at virtual environments, and so this was a medical environment, so I had to perform a tracheotomy. Is that the right word? Yeah, I think it is. And in a test environment, you would physically perform this with your VR headset on, and at AQA we're considering whether it's possible to use technology like that to create a learning environment for students, to create an assessment environment for students. Who knows? But it's all at the pace that has to, and I know this is frustrating, particularly for the EdTech world, but it all has to be at a pace where we can still guarantee robust assessments on a massive scale. So although it probably feels like that pace is not as quick as people would like, it's about making sure that we're really careful to do that in a way that doesn't let any students down, if that makes sense.
It does, and it's all your fault and AQA's fault. Of course it is. No, it's one of those things. I think when you're eager, and you see that actually, let me rephrase it. It's obviously not your fault, and it's not AQA's fault. It's great to hear that some real positive things in AQA potentially leading the way. I love, just going back to the question that Ben asked, that meeting the students where they're at, not where we want them to be at a certain point in time. Like, how can we accelerate and decelerate learning at a time that's appropriate to them, based on maturity, based on readiness, based on just the fact that for a month they've absolutely flown because the environment around them is just great. Exam season is at a particular time. There's emotions, there's hormones, there's lots of different things. There's family, there's lots of things that can really influence that snapshot in time that we're taking. And I'm really excited to hear that there is change on the way. That might take time. Some people can't respect it, but let's expect that it will take time to get it right. That's absolutely fine, because that's what I love. The fact that in DT, I might have been doing a level 6 qualification, but in maths, it's not something, and it's something that maybe just I'm taking a bit more time to get to. So I'm really just taking my time to get to even the level 2, level 3 stuff that I'm at. And it's knowing that actually you can decelerate based on subject, based on passion, and I think that's just a wonderful thing in terms of assessment that would really, I think, transform the lives of our young people in terms of their approach and the way they as. And I commend if that's what's happening with the AQA. Hopefully, it's happening with other awarding bodies, and we'll talk about the fact that you collaborate and communicate across awarding bodies as well. But I love it, absolutely love it, because ultimately, hopefully, it's a little bit too late for me and Ben. Sadly, Ben's older than me. I know I look better. No, he isn't. I just look younger than Ben because I had an easy paper round. But but I think by the time that the next generation comes in, my children, Ben's children are in that, something will happen that will really, really be tailored to actually what the world is of 10 years ago and now, rather than actually what we've been doing for a period of time, because of some of the
Yeah.
changes. It does take time. So yeah, no, I love it, absolutely love it. And
I think we're
sorry, go on, Louise.
sorry. I was just going to say, I think we're very aware as well that in terms of the digital world that students are moving into in their careers, in their lives, whatever, there are things that are, there is potential there to make it so much more aligned with what they're going to be doing in the future. And also to make it more inclusive. When we're looking at digital exams, we're very aware that actually students are probably much happier typing in responses or speaking in responses or having themselves recorded than they are sitting and handwriting. And in terms of, bias or making sure that things are fitting their needs, we're very aware that there's probably other ways to do it. So it's definitely something that AQA are looking into.
What I think's interesting there as well is that if you say to a kid what would they prefer to do, they'd say they find the easiest way, whatever makes it easy. And interestingly, lots of young people might say they're not happy with this, not happy with that, but sitting in an exam room or sometimes it's just like that's what to expect. If you're having to create a video or having to do something electronically, it's not always it's not always a preferred method for most people. It's that idea of choice, I think, that comes into it as well. It's that ability of, like Steve said, meeting the students where they're at, what works, but maintaining that level of this is what that means. I think if we're brutally honest, I wrote a post the other day. You might have seen it, you might not have done, and I was talking about the curriculum assessment review that was talking about the call for evidence that's coming out at the moment, and I said what my biggest worry is that we just do something that's a little bit superficial, like changing letters for numbers, and thinking that actually solves the problem. And somehow, like what was something that our parents and grandparents understood has then been confused by creating A's and A stars, and then has been confused again by turning them into numbers. And actually, like, my kids laugh at me and said, "Dad, you didn't get any nines." I was like, "I got 5 A stars and 5 A's. Like, that's nines." Yeah, but they're not nines then, because A star is A star. I was like, "So what you're saying to me, hold on a minute, I can't ever be." And it's just like, it's that whole, like, don't rearrange or move around the lifeboats on the Titanic. Let's just do something a little bit different. So I'm hoping that, I don't think that is going to be the case. I also don't want to do that thing, which is what I know you've just intimated at that. It's not just about, let's just digitise these exams. That's going to solve the problem, because it isn't. There's a wider conversation, right? There's a wider conversation about what does it mean to know something, and also, and I suppose the unspoken elephant in the room that's here is that idea of what does exams, assessment, full stop mean in an age where information is at our fingertips, when once on a day it was important to memorise facts and knowledge and information, when it wasn't as accessible as it is now. Now, I'm not saying it isn't. I'm not saying we don't need to remember things and know things. I understand that to be able to apply and to be able to do the critical reflection and all the high-end thinking skills, you've got to be able to have a base level of understanding, a base level of knowledge. The question is, what does that mean? What does that mean for our curriculum and assessment beyond that?
Yeah, and I need to just jump in there about D&T, and this is why I'm so passionate about it as a subject, because it literally is that. It's about drawing knowledge from everywhere else, and it doesn't matter whether it's knowledge that you know now or whether it's, something you learn in 5 years' time, and knowing what to do with it. And I think that's the exciting thing about what the curriculum could be and is in D&T, but I'm sure it is in some other subjects too, but obviously that's my area and soapbox. But there's nothing more important than creating students who know what to do with the knowledge they come across. They don't need to have it all now, but having the skills to do something about it is the exciting bit, I think.
Okay. Assessment review. I was going to say exam review, curriculum review. Everything's a review. That's fine. How do we influence and how do we get more diversity and rebel ideas and diverse thought to influence a review so that it doesn't become a review, an opinion of people that have maybe that whole thing of you've worked in education. I've been institutionalized by the organization I've been. How do we make sure that it's not just that echo chamber of all of those people that have done it before? And I'm not saying that's the Edufuturist at all. What I'm saying is industry, outside of sector, beyond DT, and all of these different things to really shake it up and positively influence it so that parents, grandparents, guardians, how do they influence potentially what they're seeing in the conversations they're having with their young people beyond just education, having an opinion of itself? That whole thing of, how do you change a leader? Well, you don't give them a mentor that was the leader before them. That's the challenge, isn't it?
Yeah.
Hopefully that question makes sense. How do we influence it to be greater than just a review and a roadmap or something that's already been?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. There's not an easy answer to that, is there? I think in terms of this review, obviously anyone can input, but it's getting those people to want to do that. We do a lot of work with stakeholders who are D&T stakeholders in my area of work, but across all the different subjects, who are not necessarily part of the education loop. They are people that work for big engineering companies, for example, that kind of thing. And we encourage them to get involved in this kind of review or focus groups that we have when reform comes along, that kind of thing. But I'm not sure that is enough. Like you say, I think it needs to be something that we can encourage through lots of different means. And I'm not sure how to do that. I think, as an awarding organisation, we will work really hard to try to consider how our particular specifications need to change and engage with organisations like that. But in terms of the review, I imagine there is a huge proportion of people sitting outside of education that don't even know that it's going on.
And maybe it's people like yourselves, Louise, maybe it's us, Ben. Maybe we need to get a whole conversation and put it out in terms of our newsletter, that's now at 3,200 people every single week. We say, what's your opinion? What would you change? And we say, might not be listened to, but where do we submit it on these people's behalf? Because ultimately, that's a collection of over 3,000 people's and their opinions. Some in education, some C-level, some people that will just be very, very rare, and some people that work in the tech industry. I think it's also that realisation, and England does have a challenge often with this, that the people that support some of the decisions, and again, this is not AQA, this is not even government, because some of their biggest network and some of the biggest industries in England will be organisations that employ hundreds and thousands. These large organisations like the employees like NHS or Rolls-Royce or BAE and Airbus and all. But actually, if you think about DT specifically and some of the industries and some of those creatives, the roles that they want to go into, actually, I think it's either definitely above 85%, maybe above 90% of all of employers within the UK are actually SME and SMB. Do you imagine how many people that work in a trade that are in the UK that maybe are one or two people? How do they influence? Because ultimately they'll be wanting to take people that are the next generation of people that need that skill. How do they get involved? It's really difficult, because how would you make them aware? Because you want the big decision makers, and actually it's like working with a multi-academy trust compared to each individual primary school or secondary school is much harder, and it takes much more time and effort, but it's probably worth it, isn't it?
I think it's a great point and a great idea to get more people involved. I think not even just from where does this subject lead you in terms of a career, but thinking back to what you said before about parents, perhaps anybody, who do we want as the future society that we have to work with and we want our kids to work with? What kinds of skills do we think that they need to have? Not just, in D&T, what does the curriculum look like because I run a construction company? Or, taking that kind of career path out of it. How do we want our citizens to look,
Just call it out for us three on the call. Anybody good at DIY? I'm absolutely shocking. Ben, are you any good at DIY? Louise, are you any good at DIY?
I'm okay.
I'm
Not
horrendous.
brilliant.
Look at these. These are pen pushing hands. These
So-
are I've
so
never.
actually-
I can't do it.
The call to action is there's a skills gap, even at the most basic level. And I know there's DTs beyond that, but like, you know, actually, are you fearful of DIY? If so, how can you influence so that actually the next generation isn't fearful and enjoys it and has a passion and actually can just be self-sufficient? Probably doing a lot of people and the handyman out of the job. But actually, even just that raw form, that's a skill that actually 2/3 of the people on this call lack.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's skills like that which are very practical, but then also sort of big soapbox thing that I go on about all the time is about critical thinking and about students who we want people to understand the impact of what they decide on the rest of society. So when they're designing products, and that product could be anything from a system to a physical prototype, do they know that they're representing all of society? Have they considered that it's going to work in the same way for everybody? You know, there's some amazing literature out there at the moment, and it's a big talking point. But things like, I play the piano. The octave is too big for my hands to reach. And there's studies, and I'm taking this as just one example, but there's studies about the percentage of women in professional careers as pianists, orchestras, etc. And the percentage is tiny. And when you look at their handspan, they have unusually large handspans. And that's because the piano has not been designed for everybody. It's been designed for 50% of the population. There's all kinds of other examples like that. So I'm kind of digressing, but don't we want students who know and care about issues like that? And they do care when you tell them, they really do care. This generation of students coming through. Don't we want people who want to change things like that? Don't we want them to be critical about the products that they choose on a day-to-day basis? And then potentially those that they design. But, you know, they need to be critical consumers as well as professional designers, makers. And I think those kind of key skills, whatever career they go into, is really, really important.
I would definitely agree. I was struggling to undo it again, so I totally agree. Like that idea about professionalization, the ability to contextualize, the ability to cross link this into not just workplace, but into life and future life, and being able to then take that critical. You mentioned critical thinking a few times in this call, and actually, that's the bit. It's the bit that I feel like I get on a soapbox about. It's not about can you regurgitate facts. It's can you acknowledge that those facts, whether they're true, false, right, left, where are they? Do you know where they've come from? Can you see what the source is? Can you think about them in a different way? Can you turn them on their head? Can you compare them to other things that you already know? And then can you use that to then apply into a brand new context? Them things really, really, really are what we are doing. And in fact, every teacher you would ever encounter, I think pretty much I'd be quite confident to say, is not just about asking young people to pass exams. It's not just about getting a number or a letter or whatever symbol they're going to replace it with next. Like, it's about doing something broader and getting young people to move to a place where they can thrive and function in society, whatever society throws at us. I've just finished an incredible book, like, and this is not a plug for a book, but it's an incredible book called AI 2041. Some of you might have read it, and I know that some of the people that listen to this will definitely have read it. It's written by the guy who was the head of Google in China, alongside a novelist, and it's basically 10 short stories, novels, scientific fiction, basically trying to explain AI concepts, but in the sake of a story. And actually, it's just really cleverly written, but it's teaching AI. And I thought to myself, what a great way to summarize how the future of education could look like if we can somehow contextualize and make things interesting and curious and exciting. I want to turn that page, every single page of it, because I want to know what the story is. And then I'm learning about GANs and all sorts of stuff that I had no idea about. until I'd started and they'd put it in context, and I thought this is super clever. And what you've been talking about there from a D&T perspective, and you can see really clearly you're super passionate in that space. And what is really good is that in the UK we've got a team of people that are absolutely fighting hard to ensure that we don't lose the really important elements that are part of D&T, and more broadly STEM and the other bits that sit in that space. And people like Ben Edmonds and Aaron Patchin from the Inventor Club, and Trudy Barone, who's a friend of yours, like others that are really doing this, and it's important. So we're grateful for people that do fly the flag and want to do something significant and continue the conversations that need to be had. We always finish our podcasts with 3 quick fire questions. You may well have seen them, you might have heard them, or they may well become brand new to you. Some people go, "Oh, why did you not tell me about this before?" I always panic about this, but we it's all good. It's quick fire. It's what comes to you. So we've got 3 questions, and yeah, let's see where this goes. So I'll start with one, then Steve will give you one, then I'll do one. So the first one is, if you could change one thing about education overnight, what would it be?
Oh my word, that is one heck of a question. What would I change? I mean, it sounds like a bit of a line, but it would be about accessibility for me, that everybody gets a fair stab at it. Yeah, accessibility.
Okay. What's the most exciting education trend that you're seeing emerging?
Ooh, I'm going to have to plug my friend Trudy Barrow's work in AI here, and I think AI in D&T is really, really exciting. It's something that we hear from teachers about a lot, and there's a lot of concern over it, but I think it's only an exciting thing.
Love it. Who's your biggest inspiration in education?
Wow. Who's my biggest inspiration? Oh gosh, that's a really, really difficult one. Do you know what? There's these 2 guys that do this podcast called Steve Hope and Ben Whittaker, and they are just blown out the water.
You've not even heard about us until 2 weeks ago, but it's absolutely fine. No, if that's the cop out, I'll take that. If everybody says I can't think of one,
that's never. Oh, right. Take it back. We're not putting this one out. If you're saying that's a cop out, you're the first person that's ever said this.
We'll edit right at the end. Yeah, just
She said Ben Whittaker, I think, not Steve.
But it's been an absolute pleasure. You know what? To hear the story of education, to potentially education reform and change. I'm really excited and great to hear what AQA are doing. I know you mentioned some of the stuff in terms of some of the maths work and everything else. Where do we find out more, Louise? Is there something that, whether you call it a website or we can put it into the show notes, is there anything that we can guide people to?
I'll send you an email, shall I, with you a few links to where people can find out more.
Yeah, we'll stick them in the show notes. We'll stick them in the newsletter and everything else. So yeah, no, they're absolutely great. I think meeting people where they're at and rather than just relying on the end is going to be absolutely key and pivotal. So it's been brilliant. Thanks for coming on and joining us.
Thanks very much for having me. It's been really fun.
Thank you.